I really love cookies, like a lot. Sandwich cookies that are like chocolate chip on both sides. I love Oreos, but they do give me heartburn like really badly. But like I like a sandwich cookie from a local bakery. There's a gay coffee dry bar in my town that I love that has these amazing vegan sandwich cookies sometimes. Shout out to Lotus Brew. It's an amazing place. They have a banned book library and everything. And but yeah, it's super cool place. And my writers group that I'm a part of there, they were so excited about this. And I put my book in the library so that it's there, partly because my growing up community is real mad that I wrote this.
So it's like
yeah, so it's kind of technically a banned book, you know?
Congratulations.
We need to work that into our marketing.
That's the best thing for sales ever. I mean, well, I'm not even joking.
I actually lost, I was in a housing situation, and when they found out what this book was about, I got thrown out. So,
hi, I'm Joe Beal, the founder and CEO of Microcosm Publishing. I'm also the author of A People's Guide to Publishing, which distills what I've learned from selling millions of books over the past 28 years.
I'm Ellie Blue, the Vice President of Microcosm. We started this podcast to share what we've learned with newer publishers, so you can learn from our mistakes. Or maybe you just want to learn about the publishing industry.
This week, we welcome first-time guest and, I believe, debut author.
Yes.
To the pod, author of Disabled Witchcraft, 90 Rituals for Limited Spoon Practitioners. We changed that several times.
That number really foxed us.
I am an eclectic witch and also someone who is disabled. I live with a number of different varying interlocking health conditions. And when I started on my path with witchcraft, I noticed that a lot of the resources were inaccessible for various reasons. Things were really expensive, and I have a lot of medical bills, so not a lot of disposable income. And I thought, that's not great. But I also noticed that things like incense was sort of an expectation. And for me, I have really severe allergies, so that kind of boxed me out of a lot of witchy spaces because a lot of them just have incense. And so I thought it might be an interesting question to explore. How could we make the path a little bit more accessible? And so I wrote a bunch of rituals from my own experiences that I had sort of cobbled together. And I wanted a book that started the conversation rather than ended it, because accessibility is layered and complicated. But I just, that's what I wanted to do.
And
you did
it. So good. Yeah.
And, I don't know if this is an appropriate spoiler. Wait, so when is your publication date? Do you know?
I think it's
I want to say
publisher.
What's happening?
I think it's September 17th.
Okay, so it hasn't even happened yet.
Yeah.
So in that case, I have very good news, is that 3 of the Ingram warehouses have sold out and reordered already.
Oh.
This week, which that just means that they severely under expected on this book.
Okay.
Which is good. Like, that's what, I mean, in a certain sense, like in another sense, like you want them to have reasonable expectations and like know that you're a very important author. But in another sense, like,
if they're going to miscalibrate their expectations, you want them to go low, not high.
Yes. What usually happens is they'll buy 1,000 and then they'll return 400 or 600 or whatever, whereas like in your case, they bought, I don't actually know how many they bought offhand, but they bought another 600 or something this week. So,
well, that's awesome. I'm glad to hear that there's that much interest in that. That's rad.
You're not alone.
Well, so before I guess we get into talking, I don't know. Yeah, I feel like the story of your book and your relationship with Microcosm is pretty interesting.
Stories.
It's a whole narrative arc.
Bernie looked up when I said stories.
Oh yeah, anyone who can't see
he'll reappear.
Screen, Bernie is here. Cute. Yeah, can you tell us sort of like the path to publication of your book?
When did you start on this book?
So that's a really good question. This book existed as a couple of different manuscripts before it became like a microcosm book, before I ever pitched it. So I grew up in a pretty religiously extreme environment, a high control group. And when I was first starting to look at writing a book about disability and spirituality, I was still in that world, and I pitched it to somebody, and they felt that that there wasn't really an audience that was easily accessible to. I know.
Religious people are never disabled. I mean,
I have a lot of
questions. Yeah, it was they felt like, it was an odd situation. And in hindsight, I think it was good that didn't work out, because that would have been especially since my spiritual path was evolving already at that point. And so I kind of just tabled that project for a little while, and I was keeping my eye out for places where I could pitch a book like that. But I'm also I was a freelance editor at the time. And I walked into Bettie's Pages, which is the best bookstore ever, in my opinion. It's a local bookstore. And they had a pin that was made by Microcosm. It was a little like typewriter that said the revolution between the lines, I think. And I was like, that's super cool. So I brought it home, and being the publishing nerd that I am, I looked on the back and I was like, oh, so this is a publisher that put this out. I'm going to just go peruse their website. And a couple months after I did that, I hopped on the website. I think it was June of last year, and I read through the submissions guidelines, and I was like, I have something that I could pitch. And I tweaked my original idea to make it more of a microcosm book and more of a witchy book. And I pitched it, and then I heard back really fast. I think it was the next morning.
Did Joe apologize for how long it took to write back, though?
I have a tendency of doing that.
Yeah, well, if you didn't need to apologize, because I mean, I worked in publishing before, in acquisitions, and like the fact that it was the next day was unheard of. Like, I couldn't believe it. And so we had a conversation about it, and I think I sent some sample stuff, and so we went back and forth, I think, for like about a week. But like, that was really cool. And then by the end of that week, the bones of Disabled Witchcraft existed, and here we are today. That was last year.
Okay, so
yeah.
Right. Yeah. And you said June?
June, yeah.
Okay, so like a year and 3 months. Wow, that is fast.
Yeah, it was really fast.
Go us. Wow, we did it right for once.
So a few other things happened in the meantime.
Oh yeah, well, maybe. Was there, like, I don't know, I keep hearing there's an election or something.
No, not even world events. Like, we
was there like a virus or something? I can't.
No, that was already old news. Yeah, well, I mean, when we started interacting with you, Kandi, you were so fast, and you were so meticulous, and you were so like obviously knowledgeable. I mean, a lot of people are editors and work as editors without necessarily like being able to do it in the way that we need, and you obviously could do it in the way that we needed. Like, that was just kind of clear from the start. So we were like, oh, do you want to do some freelance editing also? And then, like, as we were discussing that, we had a job opening come up, and we were like, Kandi, please apply. And that's what happened.
And yes. Yes. So I in the interest of full disclosure, yes, I'm an editor for Microcosm. And a lot of people ask me if like the book came after that. And like, no, actually I did it backwards. I wrote the book and pitched the book first, and then I started editing for Microcosm. So that's the origin story there for what I do for work at this point.
It was a great resume.
And the funny thing is, like, most publishers won't accept submissions from their own staff because of the fear not just even like fear of impropriety or nepotism or whatever, but like the fear of the perception that person gets like unfairly positive.
Mm-hmm.
You know what? That's funny. I didn't know that.
Yeah. I mean, we've kind of always skirted around it, but like we also just publish so many books that it, you know,
yeah.
I mean, and I think it's like to anybody actually paying attention, they would see that we treat all books equally, you know.
Yeah.
At least, you know, like as much as there is an audience for them, etc.
Yeah.
And that experience of being both a writer for Microcosm and an editor for Microcosm was really cool to do that at the same time, because like that made it easier to communicate with authors like what expectations would be, because I'm like, I've actually done this before. And so yeah.
Totally. I also was a Microcosm author before I was a Microcosm worker.
Good hires.
You know, it is one good way to like get to know each other first, but also I think, yeah, it really does help to understand where authors are coming from, like on a very personal level.
Absolutely.
So yeah, can you tell us a little bit about like balancing that? Like, was it difficult to balance? Like, were there any moments when you were like, am I on the clock or am I the author?
There were a lot of good like expectations and communication set up beforehand. I tried to do so like I have reasonably regular working hours. And I tried to do the schedule my days where there were edits and things to do on my book so that would happen afterwards or like on a weekend or something. And everybody was just really great. Like Olivia was my editor and she did a lovely job and was very supportive and helpful in making the book the best that it could be. Because I originally had like put all the rituals just in one, like they weren't in chapters, and she made the very good suggestion to group them by different types of rituals. And I think that made the book stronger and also easier to find rituals because it's sort of like a grimoire. Like we want it to be easy to like figure out like, what am I looking for today for ritual purposes? And so now it's much better organized. And so yeah, that was just I had a very good experience about balancing those two worlds.
Excellent. So you didn't get to be your own editor, unfortunately.
Oh yeah, I had to be my own editor. Good grief. I don't recommend it.
But
No. I in previous publishing jobs that I've had, I had, this is my first book, but I have edited like short form content of myself before, and that's not a real good time because it's just like I know what needs to happen as an editor, but also like if you've written it, there's going to be blind spots that you just don't like see.
Totally.
Right. I know. Yeah, it wasn't. And yeah, it was. I don't know. It was the publishing book like my 10th book or 12th book, or it was something like that.
107th.
And it was the first one where I was like, I don't even. And then the business book too. Man, I'm really pigeonholing myself here. Those were the first two books where I was like, this is the obvious sequence and structure. Whereas like every other book, I would just be like, I don't know, editor, please give me a structure.
Yeah, having a good editor is a luxury, that you now help provide to our authors.
Yeah.
It really does make a huge difference though. Like, I don't know. I just also think like every editor has strengths and weaknesses, and like, for instance, mine is copy editing, my weakness. So like everything that I edit myself has a million typos in it. And I really have no one to blame but myself.
Right.
But that's fair, and like it makes sense because editors are awesome.
No bias there, right?
None whatsoever.
The ones that I worked with a lot that aren't me, and they've all been awesome. So
okay, there's other awesome ones too. That's great. So like what do you enjoy about that side of your job?
Oh, the editing side specifically. Yeah. Okay. So I love bringing a book from a place of an idea to like a beautiful thing in your hands. Like sometimes I joke about books that I've edited as like children a little bit. Like I don't have any of my own children, but there is something very much like it's kind of like word midwifery. I don't know. Like, because you get to see, I particularly like to help books, like inclusive language, obviously, that's really important to me. And so I love to help authors find words to, because I work with so many great authors who talk about sometimes some really sensitive subjects. And I love working with them to find language that makes sense. And I love, teasing out those ideas and getting them to the place where they are accessible to the reader, because sometimes I know this as an author, it can sound really accessible in your head, but when it hits the page, it can be confusing, or it can perhaps have like biases that you didn't realize. And so I love bringing a book to a place where it's better than it started. But again, I'm bringing out the author's voice, and that's ideally you won't be able to tell that I've been there. Like I'm just like because it's about the author's voice.
So I love the voice in your book, and let me see if I can very quickly find it. You have some great rants about capitalism. And
it really kind of fits in any book nowadays.
I know,
it's
right?
Beautiful.
Well, yeah, if you spend any time with me, I will rant about capitalism.
Well, I guess tell us, like, yeah, what does disabled witchcraft have to do with capitalism?
Particularly the like accessibility. So capitalism definitely monetizes spirituality. That's part of why a lot of witchcraft resources and things like candles and all that, that's part of why it can be inaccessible. But also when we talk about capitalism and disability, capitalism has expectations regarding work and labor. And as a disabled person, I'm really lucky to have a work from home job that's very flexible, and I have edited a lot of manuscripts in doctors' offices. And I'm really grateful to have a flexible role like that. But I know that that is not the case for a lot of people. And the expectations of capitalism really don't align with anybody, but particularly disabled bodies. Our bodies don't tolerate the capitalism expectations in the same way. My body can't go at a breakneck pace, or it will fall apart and I will not be able to work at all. And so I wanted to talk about some of those intersections, and also to create rituals that allowed a lot of space for rest and no shame about resting, and understanding that literally being a disabled person and resisting those expectations it's magic. It's magic. It's transformative to just be yourself and to exist in such a way that doesn't tolerate those expectations that capitalism really, really wants.
I love that. And I love that a lot of your sort of spells and incantations that you have in the book really do sound like it's like the counter narrative, like giving yourself this like other way to like think about the internalized messages that you have about like not being good enough, not being able to work hard enough, that kind of thing.
Thank you. And I really personally do believe that witchcraft, in the way I practice, it's pretty secular, but I really like to emphasize internal transformation, knowing your own worth, knowing those things, and not defining it by super unjust systems that you're surrounded by.
Right.
Yeah. So can you tell us, for like the people that aren't like super knowledgeable about witchcraft yet, you called your book a grimoire. What does that mean?
Oh, yes. So a grimoire, it can go by a lot of names, but basically it's your book where you put your witchy things, the spells that you like, that you've discovered, the rituals that you like, the things you've written. My first grimoire was a tiny little notebook from the dollar store, because that's what I could afford. And it ended up, for me, my grimoires get really scrapbooky. So like if I find something that I like, I will make a copy of it and put it in there so that I know where it came from, and I'll try to make it pretty as much as is available to me. But you can also just like write down stuff. It doesn't have to be pretty or fancy. And so in a way, Disabled Witchcraft is sort of like a very fancy version of some of those early grimoires that I had. But also the idea is that you can make these rituals your own. And so it's a starting place grimoire for somebody who might be just starting out.
Cool. And so this is like the fascinating thing, where I feel like this is just one of publishing's glaring blind spots, is that you could almost take any subject and say, here is an economical take on this subject. It's like, if you grab any book off the shelf, it will just assume that you have 5 figures to like throw at your hobby.
At your hobby. Yep. And yeah, that's certainly not true of me. And I know that there's a lot of witchy spoonies who feel the same way. We should probably talk about the term spoonie, I'm realizing.
Oh yeah.
Fantastic. Let's do this.
Yeah. So like, on the cover, you can see the spoons, which I love that. That's like one of my favorite things on the cover. And the subtitle has limited spoon practitioners. So spoon theory is just basically this metaphor that gets used a lot in disabled spaces. And the idea is that at the beginning of a day, every person, not just disabled people, has a certain number of metaphorical spoons. And these spoons represent the energy that you have to get tasks done. And so if in a non-disabled person, you might say that you have 10 spoons at the beginning of the day, and you only would use a spoon. You wouldn't use spoons nearly as often as disabled people. So as a disabled person, I might only have 3 spoons at the beginning of the day, and simple tasks that a able-bodied person would be able to do with maybe half a spoon, it would take 3 of my spoons, and oh, no spoons left. And so I really, I find that really helpful. And honestly, as I've noticed that spoon metaphor and theory, that whole discourse has expanded on the internet, I'm noticing that it's not just disabled people who are using it anymore. Able-bodied people are starting to use it because we're having a conversation about energy levels and, again, capitalism. And I'm actually really excited about that. So like, whether you're a limited spoon practitioner or not, there's probably something here for you in Disabled Witchcraft, just because we can talk about spoons.
Right. And I think the thing that's also given us great gifts in the world is that this has offered reaction jokes like all out of spoons, only forks left, or
Yes.
making fork jokes. So just lots of great opportunities.
I've seen my spoons are in the dishwasher, or my favorite one, the no spoons, only knives.
Mhm.
Do you have any
Yeah.
spells that actually involve spoons in there?
Oh, I do. There's one where I basically suggest, if you have the ability to do this and you have a number of actual spoons, it's one that's in the kitchen. And I'm like, there's a ritual where you actually gather all the spoons in your house and put them on a table and you use that. And so I was very happy with that one.
Meta, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, whimsy is really important to me, and that is a big part of my magical practice. And also what's great about, in that case, spoons, most people have at least one spoon in their house, and that's a pretty accessible thing. But I did make a note in there, if for some reason you don't have spoons in your house, or they're all in the dishwasher, literally, like, you can visualize the spoons. That's okay.
It's true. The unlimited power of the imagination.
You don't even
Exactly.
need to open spoons. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And that too, imagination is a huge part, and that's always been part of my spirituality. But like, that's one reason I really like witchcraft. It's such a whimsical, creative path, and so it's a lot of using your imagination, and I love that about it.
So speaking of your imagination, do you have any plans for future books or zines or creative projects?
Yeah. Outside of work right now, I'm working on a little zine that is a horror poetry collection called Undead Faith. And it is about using monster myth to talk about my experience growing up in a cult. So I'm working on that. I released a mini version of it last year, but it was really short and it was just a PDF. And I'm trying to figure out how to make it like not just a PDF. And I added a whole movement this year. So I need to so there's that. And then I always have ideas. Like I'm never not writing stuff, but yeah, that's one of the projects that I'm doing, at least for fun right now.
Awesome. I love that. And your background is in zines, but maybe not the same as our zine background.
Yeah, I mean, I can talk about that a little bit. So I was making zines when I was in the high control group, but I didn't know what zines were. Like I had access to a printer and and so I made like some zines and brought them to my part of my education was at a very conservative kind of cult school that was in the area. And I remember I printed out some of those zines and I brought them to my classmates there. And I did like a beta reader test to see how, again, really a publishing nerd. Oh my God. But then I ended up, my first publishing job was actually creating zines for the high control group. Like it was literally my job to make these little quarterly zines that had, and I developed this whole publication that was like multi-genre, and we did like sci-fi fantasy stories in there. And of course I was the little queer weirdo, and I was just trying to get queer voices in there and tell people that God loved them. I got in a lot of trouble, but I had a lot of fun. But that gave me, that's my zine background, which is a very weird zine background, but I was making zines while in a cult, and eventually I got out. So.
All of the best zine makers like think they invented the format, or they like think that it's something that like they discovered in absentia and it's like anything else. It's like when you know how to do it, you like are corrupting your medium or creativity or whatever because you're putting rules on it that are not necessarily helping your goals, you know? And so, I mean, and yeah, my best friend grew up in a cult also. And so I've learned a lot about that sort of thing. But again, it's like the same thing. It's like it makes you a good critical thinker, because then you're like,
It does.
never again.
Never
You know?
again.
And then you're also like, you're just really good at like working through people's motives. So like, do you feel like that influenced your approach to craft?
Yes.
No, I can't imagine the answer is no.
Yeah.
Yes or no question.
When you grow up in a high control group and you ask questions, like that was because basically when I started practicing witchcraft, I've been drawn to it for a real long time. But again, witchcraft was like super off limits to explore while in that world. So when I finally
do it.
Oh, sorry.
Is that why you were drawn to it in part?
I mean, maybe like deeply psychologically somewhere in there, but like I just genuinely thought the aesthetic was really cool. And I met a Wiccan once who was the younger sister of my youth pastor, and I thought she was the most magnificent human being I'd ever met. And I just also should have known I was queer at that point.
I was gonna say,
yeah. Should have known. But basically, because I had to pick apart all of this, all of that growing up, when I started being like, when I left that world and was trying to pick apart what I wanted to like still have in my spirituality, I was very drawn to witchcraft. I had very little money, and I spent a lot of time in Five Below looking at their witchcraft books.
Is that a store?
Yeah. Like it's like the dollar store, but everything's $5 and under instead. Yeah. So they have a lot of like, they carry a lot of witchcraft books, and what they do is they work. I again, being a publishing nerd, I was really curious about this. I noticed that they had a bunch of editions of various like very popular witchcraft books or other very popular types of books, but they had special editions that were made for Five Below. So they were like super interesting. And so again, I was kind of there as a publishing nerd, and then also just like, because I would go to their like they had this big book table there that's, you know, full of these bargain books basically. And so I would go through and I would find the witchcraft books, and they were financially accessible because it's at Five Below, but they were, sometimes there would be a lot of ableist expectations, or again, these were books that were very, very popular or popular enough to end up at a space like that. So like, sometimes they weren't the most inclusive in other ways. And so like, it was a really interesting experience to use those like, this is such a cult word, but like the discernment skills that I picked up on like leaving that world, and also like, you know, with the very limited resources I had, trying to find something that would be helpful in my journey.
I've never heard of this store. They do exist in the Portland suburbs, apparently.
Yeah. They're a very burby store. No, absolutely.
I've never even heard of it. I wonder if it's more recent.
Joe's like, what kind of deal?
I mean, that's not even where I'm going. I'm just like, want to understand the like anthropology of this store. And that's responsibility.
So they're usually in the same strip malls as like TJ Maxx's, and it's that kind of vibe. Yeah.
So lots of dust.
Fun. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Well, is there any advice that you would want to give to your fellow authors, fellow spoonies, fellow evangelicals? Any advice you want for people listening to this program?
I mean, I'll start with kind of how I end the book, and that is saying that you are fucking magical, and please do not forget that. But I also, what I would say for authors specifically is like, with books, like I don't let the speed that this book got published in fool you. I have been trying to pitch books and write books since I was very young. And so like this is the culmination of like well over a decade of work. So like it looks like an overnight thing. It was not. And so what I would say is rejection is super duper a part of the process. So like if you are being rejected and having trouble finding a home for your manuscript, and you've changed it a lot of different ways, keep trying, and also try different things. Like again, the original version of this that I wrote that I kind of picked up looked very different than how this book was even pitched. And yeah, it just, I would say keep at it. Like the persistence is the only way I've ever gotten anything done in publishing. Like just keep coming back. So that tenacity is really good. And basically don't be too hard on yourself, because like if you're being rejected, it's not a personal rejection. It's literally just that this book at this time at that publisher could not sell. And that is again a capitalist reality, but it is what it is. And that doesn't mean, and also like if you have an idea that you love and you can't seem to sell, maybe make a zine for fun.
Yes.
Right. That's great. That's advice. And I mean, we had an author who pitched to us, and it was like, right. And I was in the like throngs of coming back from Frankfurt Book Fair, and I was months behind with my work. So literally every email took 2 to 4 weeks to get back to her. And so I just kept apologizing and I kept apologizing. And then finally she was like, this is the fastest pitch to contract to publication of my decades of writing career. And I was like, then I'm really sorry. That's awful. What a dumb industry.
Yeah.
Who did that? But so is this your like first book that you didn't do like as part of a job?
Yes. So this is my first traditionally published book. Again, I had like the zines that I worked on and I was the general editor on before in previous roles, but this is my first like traditionally published book. And again, I have been in publishing for a while and I've been writing for a long time. So yes, this was super fast, but as a general rule, I would say this industry moves just so slowly, and that is to be expected. And that has nothing to do with the merit or quality of your work. If you are pitching, like it is not a quick industry. Books take a very long time to gestate.
I just had to write to a bunch of authors and be like, your book is actually now coming out in 2 years instead of 1 year or less like you thought. And I don't know, we try to set expectations, and it's not because of them at all. It's because of our schedule.
Yeah.
And a lot of it's really hard. I mean, I have this conversation just about every day where I say like, yes, you are done. No, that doesn't change anything, because most of these accounts need a 9-month buying window.
Yeah.
And that's really what it comes down to. And like, because your subject is topical, like there's a time and a schedule for that. And we don't want to publish your gardening book in December. So like, it's like all those kinds of scheduling things. And whereas like in their mind, they just think about like how many hours work it is and how long it'll take to get to that point. So I appreciate your view. I mean, it's not to say that like publishing doesn't screw up, but there's a good reason more often than people would believe.
Yeah.
Because like often what happens is like there's a conflagration of situation.
Yes. And one of the best pieces of advice that I can give to like authors in general is if you have access to a bookstore in your city, including big box bookstores, because this can be educational, look around. If you're trying to get a little bit of a better sense of the publishing industry, I was really lucky because I had an editorial internship where somebody really prioritized store visits with me. And that, so like what I would say is, go to your local Barnes & Noble and also your local indie stores too, and look at the way books are arranged and look at what they're highlighting during different months, because this will give you a sense of what's happening. And you might find some really interesting trends is a very complicated word, but like you might find a niche that you hadn't thought about before for your book, and you might be able to adapt a little bit to what is selling. But also that could just be a very educational time, because so I recommend store visits all the time. And I'll tell people if they're not in a town with a Barnes & Noble, seriously go to Walmart or Target in the book section and see what they're pushing out too, because this can be instructive.
Totally.
Right.
Yeah.
Or like even your grocery store or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's books everywhere when you look, and I bet there are a lot more books being sold at CVS than we even think.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. And part of the reason we were able to do your book so quickly is like we had an existing series, we had success within the series, we tried to do a certain number per season within the series, so it just didn't. And we have like a design grid, so we just,
And the timing lined up to make it a fall release.
and most importantly of all, you pitched an idea where there was like, and like you can like spin this in a positive or a negative way, like, but the reality is that you want the book to resonate with the readership.
Yeah.
Or it's kind of like you're like dropping a tree in a forest and it's not finding its audience. So like you want a publisher that knows how to, like, what to do with your book.
Yes. Yes.
Like, rather than just like a publisher who's willing to have you. And I think that one's hard for people because they think about it in terms of, they're like, well, my thing is really good, so why don't they want me? And you're like, well, they can't do anything with it. It's not about the quality of it, So your like idea was original, and there was demand and interest and like no competition. So it was like one of those like literal no-brainers where we were like, well, like we know we can do at least a few thousand. So
I mean, I guess Kandi could have been like really difficult or something that could have screwed it up.
Are you
secretly difficult?
Do you want to come out as difficult?
I try, because I was an editor before writing a book. I there are some things that I learned, because it's not like I don't think authors ever set out to be difficult. I think it's just because you don't know how the industry works. And I had a distinct advantage because I knew how the industry worked. I had already had work of mine edited before, so that experience wasn't new, because that can be really intimidating at first, because and it's especially if it's your book, and then you get feedback that isn't like 100% glowing, and then you sort of have an existential crisis. And what I would tell authors is, when you get your book feedback, give yourself like a day or two to process those comments before you do anything else. Give yourself lots of time and let yourself be. And you know what? You might have some angry feelings, and that is okay. And it is better to have those angry feelings a couple of days before you actually start responding to comments in a document. Because often what will happen, if that does happen, people will comment and then they'll really regret what they've said. And it's just like, no, it's okay. Like, and I, as an editor, am used to hearing that. That doesn't really bother me at this point. But it's give yourself some space to feel your feelings with, and
such good advice.
Yeah. And I also wanted to circle back to this.
It's true, actually.
Yes.
At it. The model of a difficult author.
But yes, you were saying.
I was going to circle back to the submissions process too. Is that Microcosm had a really detailed submissions page, and I know that can be very overwhelming as an author to read a submissions page like that. But that being said, what is so cool about submissions guideline pages is that they tell you exactly what the publisher is looking for. And what the awesome thing about that is, if you can develop an idea that is a perfect fit for that, you have a really good chance of at least being considered. And the other thing too is that if you don't feel like you fit with that, if you
sorry, go ahead.
What's distracting?
If you don't feel like you fit into that, that's actually a good thing to know. This is kind of analogous to like dating. You want to know that information up front, because in this case, it's a business relationship, and it's going to be that's the other thing. And because books are a creative process, but you have to remember it's a business relationship ultimately. And like it is, so you want to make sure that it's a good fit. And so read the submissions guidelines. And if you're finding that they just really don't vibe with you, maybe don't submit there.
Right.
Great.
Yeah.
Or submit your complaints and move on. I don't know. That's fine.
Sure. That's an option as well. Feel those feelings.
I mean, I guess. Yeah.
So I chose the one that gets that, so I can easily volunteer.
A lot of, and so we offer a complimentary feedback service you would not believe how often people misinterpret that feedback as interest.
Oh,
Think they have like a hill to negotiate from. And it sometimes has to go all the way back to being like, no, I'm helping you. I'm not saying we want it. And sometimes you have to get that specific. Or, I mean, there's so many cases where they will come back and be like, you're wrong. And I'm like, it doesn't actually matter if I'm wrong or not. This is your feedback.
yes. I think it does help. I'm neurodivergent, so I'm very direct. And publishing does kind of require a degree of directness. And that is that it's a hard pill to swallow at first, but like once you get past that initial like hill, it's much easier. And then it's great because everybody's being direct and expectations are there. And then your book is either being made into the best it can be or being redirected to a place where it can become the best it can be.
Right.
Totally. Or you could just be like, wow, this publisher really isn't for me. They really don't get my book. And that's completely valid.
Which is great.
Like,
Yes, exactly.
And I will say I've put more, maybe not more time, but I've put more effort into our submissions process than any other part of our operation, because the more that's honed in, the better it works.
Yeah.
And then you aren't stuck, because it basically, it only doesn't work if somebody is like fundamentally dishonest, which does happen every day, where they will submit something as something else to try and get it through. And then you like, that's found out pretty quickly. You know? And then, so, but it really, like, I'm trying to save their time and my time.
Yes.
So, and you know, but it just doesn't seem like that is managed as a priority at most publishers. Like, they really think that you have to have like thousands of pages of reading to like do submissions.
Thanks for joining us once again.
Please send your questions to podcast@microcosmpublishing.com so we can answer them on future episodes.
And please give us 5 stars on iTunes and everywhere else that podcasts are reviewed.
You can find us on the internet at microcosm.pub,
On Twitter at Microcosm,
on Facebook at Microcosm Publishing,
on Instagram at Microcosm_pub.
and here in Portland, Oregon on North Williams Avenue.
Thank you so much.
Have a wonderful week. It's called Disabled Witchcraft. Look at this beautiful package and get a copy for yourself. Get a copy for the spoonless person in your life.
For your dog.
Get a copy for your banned bookshelf at your gay vegan bakery.
For your Christian group housing situation. Oh.
There's really nobody who couldn't benefit from having this book around.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much. It's been so fun talking about this today. Like, this has been a great conversation. That again, so an actual banned book, but yeah, that was a much grimmer turn after talking about cookies.
I know.